Hello, everybody. I'm Everton de Oliveira from the Groundwater Project. We're here to talk today to the authors of a very, very nice book that I recommend you to download and to read it. I read it and I had a great time reading the book. It's a very nice book. I'm not going to spoil anything about the content of the book. We're going to learn about the book during our interview. Okay. And I have here today Lenny Konikow. He has a long-standing career on a U.S. Geological Survey, and he's also is now the editor of the Groundwater Journal from NGWA. And I have also with us here John Bredehoeft, very famous also hydrogeologist. He has a long career in USGS as well, and he was a former editor of the Groundwater Journal. And I'm being very brief about their careers because they have lots of very important achievements that we as hydrogeologists have used. And some of us might not even know that they were behind the things that we are using, okay? So welcome both of you. It's a pleasure and an honor talking to you today. It's very nice and congratulations for your book. It's very, very good and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a success. So please, I'd like you to make a short introduction of yourselves. Tell about how you became a hydrogeologist and how you end up producing this book. Whichever wants to go first, please.
Okay, well, I'll start. How did I become a hydrogeologist? Well, like so many other things, it's a matter of luck and chance. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in geology. I didn't have any training in hydrogeology at that point, but I was fortunate to land a summer job with a preeminent groundwater consulting firm at that time in the late 60s, and this was Garrity and Miller. And they took me on for the summer, and it was a wonderful experience. The people there were wonderful mentors and very generous to a young student. And I learned about hydrogeology. They were very generous in sharing their knowledge with me and teaching me. And I realized then that this is the aspect of geology that I want to focus on. It's a field that's beneficial to society, and everyone needs water. There'll probably always be a job. So that's what drove me into it.
That's very good. That's very good. You, John?
I was a geology student, and I always thought that water looked interesting to me as a student. It seemed to me that contrary to oil exploration, where people ran around the globe to all kinds of places like Saudi Arabia and Alaska, when you were worried about water, you were worried about people in usually nice places. Usually people were worried about their water supply in California or in Arizona. So it seemed to me that looking at a career in hydrogeology offered a lot of opportunities for the future. And I was lucky enough to get a kind of mentorship at the USGS, where I studied under, well, didn't study, where I worked with some of the older geologists at the USGS, and I was lucky enough. I'm old enough that I met most of the people who are credited with developing modern groundwater hydrology. They, believe it or not, came through our office, most of them. And I met these people, and as my career went on, I interacted with these people more and more. So I was lucky in a sense that I was in the right place at the right time with the right people. they were developing the science, and I was there at the time that development was taking place. I was lucky, and I'm old enough to have gone through all that. So that was great luck on my part.
That's quite interesting and quite humble of your part, because like you today, I have the chance to be with you guys, the big names in hydrogeology. So I'm lucky, just as you were when you started. Well, I'm old enough already. I have a career in hydrogeology. So can you name some of the guys that you've met, guys, in the past, John?
I guess the most interesting person that relates to what this chapter or book is all about is C.V. Tice. Most people attribute his suggestion, I guess that would be the word, 1935 or 36, I've forgotten which, about that groundwater that the equations that describe groundwater flow were analogous to heat flow.
Heat flow. Yep.
And that idea was met with some skepticism, particularly by the boss at the time, who was O.E. Meinzer. O.E. Meinzer thought that Tice was on the wrong track. But along came C.E. Jacob in 1940, and he derived the equations from scratch, from first principles, and he arrived at an equation that looks like the heat flow equation, which vindicated Tice. So I think put the whole idea of groundwater hydrology on a theoretical basis, which has served it well. But this paper, our book, goes back to a paper that Tice wrote in 1940. 1940, wrote this paper for the civil engineer on the source of water for wells, in which basically he looked at an aquifer and applied the conservation of mass ideas and developed the whole idea of what has to happen if you're going to have a sustainable groundwater development, considering that all the water is fresh and that we're not worried about water quality at the moment, we're just worried about water as a quantity. And so the ideas in this paper elucidate Tice's 1940 ideas. Now, unfortunately, Tice's 1940 ideas got lost over time. And there was a whole new idea grew up that if you somehow could measure recharge, that you had some idea that would tell you something about how large a development could be made and be sustainable. And Tice had shown originally that idea was bad. It's a myth. The idea that recharge somehow determines how large a development can be. And Tice was upset about it. He talked to me. I knew him pretty well, and he told me he was upset that his 1940 ideas had gotten lost. So meanwhile, I wrote a paper with Stavros Papadopoulos and Hilton Cooper, which talked about Tice's ideas. And I remember him saying to me, well, now I don't have to do anything. You guys wrote the paper that I think has been written. And so he was pleased that we wrote these, that somehow his 1940 paper, 1940 ideas in his paper had come back to mainstream groundwater hydrology. And this book that we've written, as I said, elucidates those ideas.
That's very interesting. To start with, well, we can talk about it. You have very nice stories. We can hear about them for hours in a row. Thank you. So you both work for the USGS. Lenny today is the editor of the Groundwater Journal, sort of inherited the job from you, John, not directly, but yes. And you produced many nice things together. How is it possible? Like this book that you produced, that is, I read it. The reading is so pleasant. It's very interesting, and it's light to read for a subject that is so interesting for us today, and it's so important. And how is it possible for you both to carry such a happy marriage for so long? Because you know each other for so long, you're friends, and it's still working. What's the magic about it?
I'm not sure the analogy to a marriage is a good one.
It's just a joke, of course.
Well, there are some differences. I will say that actually it is exactly 50 years since I met John at a conference. That was exactly 50 years. And so I guess in that sense, it's our golden anniversary. And,
Congratulations, congratulations.
For my part, I'll always be grateful to John for the opportunities and encouragement that he's generously offered me since the day we met. He's been a mentor and a friend. And certainly my long career with the U.S. Geological Survey is a direct outcome of the good fortune to have met John at that conference 50 years ago.
Oh, that's very good. You, John.
How to put this? We respect one another. We don't always agree, but we respect that the other person has an opinion. We're willing to listen. And I think it's the mutual expression or the mutual respect that we have for one another, both as professionals and as individuals, that makes it work.
That's very nice. That's very nice to know. It's very important as a relationship, professional career, to have people that you can discuss, you can listen to each other and learn from each other. That's quite important. It's not always that you have good people around that you can discuss the profession. That's very good. It's very good. I have a point for you here. Your book opens with a question, which I totally agree. Is the task, you say, is the task for the groundwater community in the 21st century? Can the resource be developed in a sustainable manner? And if so, how can that be accomplished? Does this book give a clue for the answer of this question, which I think is the most important question for sure. I totally agree.
Well, okay. I'll start and say, yes, groundwater can be developed in a sustainable manner. We've tried to offer in the book the principles that show that it can be done and how it can be done and how you could ascertain that. And we try to bring the reader or the student into the tools that can be used by offering exercises and examples with computer simulation models. Because groundwater can be developed in a sustainable manner that doesn't always mean that it will be done that way, nor even that it should always be done that way. It's possible there are circumstances where it's okay to develop groundwater in an unsustainable manner, but the key is that it should be done with the knowledge of the circumstances, of the consequences of doing that under those particular circumstances. And really what we try to do in this book, among other things, is emphasize that hydrogeologists can predict the consequences of developing groundwater resources and the consequences of overdeveloping groundwater resources, so that policy can be set with an understanding of all hydrologic principles and trade-offs. And resource management can be based on science. So in setting policy, it's clear that political, sociological, and economic factors will always enter into policy making. And we've tried to bring in that scientific principles must not be ignored and they can be evaluated.
Well, I totally agree with Lenny. We agree on that point.
I have, may I ask you something else on the same point? I've been thinking nowadays, it appears to me that the society is turns to water the need of water, as a worry for humankind today. We have a big worry about weather, climate change, but water is not exactly clear in that equation. Your question points to a point that is quite important, that I always think is important. And I would like to see if you could think of something on how we could turn this important question that you raised into a cause, because this could be a cause for the 21st century for sure, right? Have you ever thought about something like that? Like turning into a cause. For example, people say, well, we have to stop the climate change by decreasing CO2. Could we have something that is so short and so easy to understand for the whole society? Because groundwater plays a huge role in the water crisis that we're facing. But I personally don't see a clear cause. We don't have to answer because I don't think it's something obvious. Just if you think about something like that.
I would say, a driving force for water use is, and growth of water use is population growth. And that's certainly not a hydrologic consideration, but it certainly impacts hydrology. And politicians generally do not want to talk about population growth or anything to do with it. So I don't know what the answer is, but at some point in our future, someone's going to have to start discussing the impacts of population growth.
No, I agree with that too. I think population, you have to ask yourself, given the planet we're living on, how large a population can we support? And it seems to me that's the basic question for mankind. How many people can we support on this planet? Yeah, and certainly water supply in places where we want to live is a major factor. I mean, people seem to want to live in the semi-arid climate where water is terribly important. And it's true all the way around the world. I mean, you can look around the world and see that that's true.
Back to the book then.
So,
you mentioned that the depletion by pumping has many consequences. One of them is ultimately transferring water from the countries to the oceans, as mentioned in your book. Can you see this from the interpretations of the GRACE project that you mentioned on your book? And I see that Lenny has worked with that as well.
GRACE is the satellites, a very advanced technology. It can measure very sensitively and precisely measure changes in the gravity field, which then could be related to changes in total water storage. The jump then to changes in groundwater storage requires some subjective and interpretive assessment. So the GRACE satellites do not directly measure changes in groundwater storage, although they're influenced by it. But the problem is total changes in total water storage and can include other factors, and that they must be separated out to truly understand it. But it's a wonderful tool and is giving us more and more knowledge. The transfer from groundwater storage or from the continents to the oceans, again, that's not something that is directly measured by GRACE, but can be assessed using GRACE data. Another limitation with GRACE, obviously, it can't go back into the 20th century. It can't look backwards before the satellite system was launched. So we're getting, in effect, a shorter term view. GRACE cannot give us the longer term perspective on continental scale water transfers. And so for that, we have to look for a kind of ground truth data sources to help fill in those gaps. And that longer term perspective, I think is quite valuable in assessing where we stand and where we're going.
Yeah, it's an important point. John.
The depletion in storage is quite significant in certain areas. Obviously, it's picked up from space, and we see certain areas where groundwater levels are going down and water is being removed from storage. And in many of these places, it's a one-time proposition. In other words, you're going to move that water out and it's not going to be recharged in any reasonable period of time. So basically, you've lost that water from the system, and you got to be willing to take that into account. And one of the places it happens is in the southern Central Valley of California, where water levels are going down at an increasingly large rate. And that's an area you can see the depletion taking place from space. And whether California has taken that seriously, I mean, they're trying to do something serious about it. Whether it's possible politically and sociologically is a question. It's clear scientifically, but whether you can do anything is a sociological question, it seems to me. I think that the community probably has done a reasonable job in informing the policymakers. That then the vested interests come into play, and it makes it that much harder. It makes it really difficult. Change the system, restrict development. That's always really hard. After development has gone on and it's big, how do you cut it back? That's a problem everywhere, it seems to me, for society.
Definitely, yes. I can relate to that. I'm here in Brazil, and I can clearly relate to that as well. Well, we discussed, we've been having interviews with the authors from the books on the Groundwater Project. And we were discussing with some of them. John was there, Warren Wood, I guess, yes, and Paul Shee. I think he works with you as in USGS as well. I would like to see if you could help us with an answer, because we just have some guesstimates about that. As the amount of water decreases, as we see that, and we can also see, as Lenny pointed out, although we have a short period of time, we know that the amount of water in the continents are decreasing, right? The question is, does this lead to an increase of temperatures within the continents? Would that affect climate change? What do you think? The idea is that water holds the temperature. It's like a buffer for temperature. And since we have less water, we might have an increase in temperatures within the continent. Does that make sense for you?
Yes, I mean, that's a good question, but a very tough one because of the many complex nonlinear processes that are involved. So I guess the short answer is I don't know. But most groundwater pumped is used for irrigation and agriculture. This widespread irrigation can certainly affect climate, at least locally to regionally, and that's actually been demonstrated. When you irrigate a field with groundwater, much of the water evaporates and transpires. And evapotranspiration probably is a cooling process. On the other hand, in the US at least, for example, much of the irrigated crops are corn, and corn is often used to produce ethanol as an energy source. And this whole process of converting it to ethanol and then using it as a source of energy is heat generating. How one weighs against the other probably could be evaluated and should be considered, but I'm not able to do that in a quantitative way.
Yes, good point. Yes, John.
No, I have no comment.
Well, yes. Well, my point here is that if we could relate groundwater use to climate change, we would have a huge political tool to boost groundwater with the politicians. That's my idea, right? So if we could relate somehow the groundwater use, the groundwater depletion that we have, with some, some climate change effects, that would give us an edge on discussing with politicians. That's why I was concerned about this topic. But I know it's not an easy one. It's not an obvious one, because we have many different points of.
You could also ask whether increased groundwater use is a cause of climate change or whether it's a consequence of climate change. And probably a strong case could be made for the latter, that precipitation patterns change, groundwater use change in response to that.
That's true. That's a good point. Yes, for sure. Maybe the consequence is even more important. Yeah, it's hard to say. Hard to say. Okay. Well, you cover in your book capture, and I've been a professor in hydrogeology for so long, and I know a lot of hydrogeologists. And I know this capture as a theme for hydrogeology courses are not like a hot topic from what I know of. How is that important in your view, and how should we focus that capture? Because it's an important topic on the book.
Well, capture follows from what we've been talking about. I mean, it's an obvious consequence of the ideas that Tice laid out, that capture is an obvious consequence of development. If you have development, you're going to have some, well, that's not true. You can have development and have all the water come from storage, but
yes.
But if you're hopeful of getting the development stabilized so that it'll last for a long period of time, then the development has to the development must equal the capture. So somehow you've got to capture enough water that it'll balance the pumping. That's the whole idea, really. Everything is right there. But you can say that, but then how to evaluate the capture, that's not an easy proposition. Usually it means you've got to have some kind of model of the system in order to evaluate what the capture is going to be. And that involves the whole business of the mechanics of how groundwater systems respond to development. That's the whole ball game.
Another aspect is that groundwater is a hidden resource, as it's traditionally been called, and it's to the general public, it's out of sight and out of mind. The public won't see groundwater depletion. It's not in their face. However, when capture becomes an important process, the public will see drying up of streams, drying up of springs, drying up of wetlands. And these are consequences or outcomes or signals of capture. So capture is the impact of groundwater development on surface water resources. As John pointed out earlier, the principles of this were laid out in Tice's classic 1940 paper, and we're trying to the attention of the public, students, scientists, engineers, anyone who will read the book. In that sense, you said you thought capture's not a hot topic in hydrogeology courses, and I would say I think it deserves a lot more attention and more
Definitely.
in hydrogeology courses. So we hope we reach the academic community with this book also.
Well, I hope so too. I hope so too. It's very well presented in your book. Congratulations, it's very good. You try to make an important topic simple, and it looks for the reader that the concepts are there. It's very easy to see the concept, to understand the concept. I like it very much. I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit about the software that we can use, because you allow people to download the software, right? Can you talk a little bit about it? Because like I said at the beginning, many hydrogeologists use your work and don't even know you were behind the scenes because mud flow is everywhere, right? So can you talk a little bit about that? Because in the book you can download also for free, please.
Well, mud flow has a long history to it. And John was one of the driving forces behind the development and availability of this code. And I think the guiding philosophy, or one of the guiding philosophies, is very similar to that of the Groundwater Project in these books, in that these types of tools developed by a government agency paid for by taxpayer resources should be available to the public at no cost. The taxpayers already paid for it. And so I always saw it as a guiding philosophy that the research and tools developed by the Geological Survey, and again, this was done in collaboration with a lot of people in the survey and quite a few people outside the survey. These tools should be available to the public and explained to the public and widely used. They're very beneficial to the profession and to society.
Yes, not only taxpayers, because I haven't paid a cent on US dollars for as a taxpayer, and I use it. So this is a very, very nice tool for everybody in the world. So thank you very much for your work. John, please say something about the software. You work on that a lot, I know.
Well, there were various policy decisions in the beginning, and as Lenny said, it was our policy right from the beginning that we would make the models or the software available. That there was thought about restricting and so forth, but it soon became available. I mean, it soon became the philosophy that we're developing these models, we're going to put them out in the hydrologic community. We were fairly sure they would be misused, but that wasn't our fault. We were going to put them out there, and we weren't worried too much about quality control of how they were used. We simply made them available at no cost to the user. And I think that was the right decision, as Lenny said. So that's what we did. And I hope that continues to be the guiding philosophy, although there's always a tendency on the part of some agency to charge for everything they can.
Yes, yes. Well, certainly that was a great move, because many like it impacted my career, for example, and I'm far away from you, and the availability of the software was so good because you could use it and research, you can develop, you can improve on your own. That was quite a move. So for you that is watching our interview here, you should take a look, because the book allows you to download the software. The software is for free. You're gonna use on some of the exercises. It's quite handy, and you're gonna see that you are able to understand much better the hydrogeological problems with the software. It's very nice, and the exercises have answers will help you understand and learning. So the case studies that you picked, how do you pick them? What was the idea behind of selecting them, please?
Well, we had 2 case studies, and the idea, one concern was that having 2 case studies made the book too long. On the other hand, I think it was somewhat necessary, because one case study, and really one that John picked, is from a real field problem, from a real system, and it demonstrates how one would analyze a system, use a mod flow model to help you figure out what's going on and to make predictions in the future and to provide a basis for policy decisions. So a very real world example. The other example is a very simplified, idealized, hypothetical stream aquifer system. And when things are completely controlled, there's less concern about uncertainty, heterogeneity, and other factors that may be dominant in the real world. In the ideal simplified example, we could really isolate cause and effect and isolate processes and really understand the principles of what's going on and test them and play around with the model to see what cause and effect relationships are. So that's really why we have the two different types of examples.
No, Lenny made the case pretty well, I think.
Well, after a lifelong working with groundwater, how do you see the future for young professionals and scientists of our field? What do you suggest? Are you optimistic about working with hydrogeology at all? I am, but I'm not trying to influence you, please.
One thing that disturbs me is that a lot of the jobs in hydrogeology in the past have been by government agencies, the USGS and then various state agencies have supported a great deal of the profession. Those government agencies have gotten squeezed by the budget, or there's been a budget squeeze, which has reduced money for almost all of them, both at the state level and at the federal level. So that means that a certain number of opportunities for hiring people are no longer there. So in a sense, if the heads and the states cut down on the number of people, then we still have the same number of people. They'll have to be picked up by the private sector. Now, how large a group the private sector can support, I'm not sure. So is it a good time to be a hydrogeologist? Well, from the point of view of the problems, we got lots of problems. And people are aware of the problems and they know they need help, but the agencies for which they're traditionally provided help are getting squeezed. So I don't know what that says.
You, Lenny.
Well, what John brought up is a very serious concern. We see that concern in the U.S. Geological Survey and in other agencies and the state agencies. So it's a real problem, but I'm hoping that the pendulum will swing because groundwater development is yielding some significant problems. And sooner or later, the government will have to respond to these problems, and they're going to have to build up the expertise to help deal with it. So in that sense, I'm a bit optimistic, and I do see a brighter future for young professionals if we could get past this current environment with politics. The basic condition is that water will always be a basic necessity for humans and for the environment. That's not going to change. It's going to be a basic necessity. There will always be a demand for groundwater. And a demand to understand it and analyze it. Therefore, there'll always be a demand for competent groundwater scientists and engineers. So, what magnitude that demand is and what the timing for providing, jobs for young scientists, that I'm not sure. But in a certain sense, that demand will be there, and we'll just see what happens.
Okay. Well, guys, it's been very nice talking to you, but our time is running out here. I would like you to please make your final statements so we can close this session. It's very nice talking to you. Please, can you go, who wants to go first?
I'll start. I'll just say that John and I both agreed to write this book and collaborate it and to participate in the groundwater project because I think we both agreed with its principles and believed it was a worthwhile cause. I know I fully support the beneficial nonprofit sharing of knowledge to the greatest possible extent, especially when it's for the benefit of students and young professionals, as well as for society in general. And I just hope that our book contributes to that effort.
For sure it will. Please, John.
Well, I hope people read the book. I think it's a contribution. D.V. Tice would be proud of us. I think we've elucidated his ideas. So anyway, hopefully people will read the book and get something out of it. Anyway.
Sure they will. I would like to thank you very much for your kindness to participate in this interview. We'll help distribute your book. I'm, as a hydrogeologist, I've read it, and I had a great pleasure in seeing a wonderful job. It's well written, as I said at the beginning. It's very easy for a young professionals, in my view. I'm teaching hydrogeology for so long, and I think it's going to be a wonderful tool, especially because you have some exercise, you offer them the tool, the software to use it, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be a success. Thank you very much, and congratulations for a wonderful job and a wonderful career. Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.